Watch the young prince in white robes by the burning barrel. His name is Noor. He just burned dozens of books with his royal family watching proudly. Then his hands start shaking uncontrollably, dropping to his knees in sudden terror.
My name is Noor. I was 24 years old on November 23rd, 2018, when my entire world collapsed in our palace courtyard. I was born into the Saudi royal family, raised in luxury and strict Islamic tradition. What happened that night defied everything I believed about God and myself. Every month, our family held what we called purification ceremonies. I remember the anticipation that would build in the weeks leading up to these gatherings. My father would receive reports from border officials about confiscated materials, and his eyes would light up with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Books, pamphlets, crosses, anything remotely connected to Christianity would be brought to our palace in large canvas sacks. I became the family's most enthusiastic participant in these ceremonies, while my cousins and younger relatives would sometimes show reluctance or boredom. I threw myself into the preparations with religious fervor. I would spend hours sorting through the confiscated materials, examining each book with disgust and righteous anger. The weight of each Bible in my hands felt like holding the enemy itself. My sister was always eager to help, but it was my father's approval that I craved most. He would watch me organize the materials with growing pride, often commenting to other family members about my dedication to defending our faith. He called me his most devoted son, the one who truly understood the spiritual warfare we were engaged in. Those words filled me with such pride that I would replay them in my mind for days afterward. Can you imagine finding joy in destruction? Because that is exactly what I felt every time we gathered in our palace courtyard for these ceremonies. The courtyard was large and private, surrounded by high walls that kept our activities hidden from any prying eyes. We would arrange the books in careful piles, sometimes sorting them by size or condition, other times simply throwing them together in a heap of what we considered spiritual contamination. The family believed we were defending Islam from Western influence and Christian missionary work. My father would often lecture us about the dangers of allowing these materials to reach innocent Muslim minds. He spoke of Christianity as a poison that could corrupt the pure faith of Islam, and we saw ourselves as spiritual doctors removing a disease from our society. This wasn't just destruction to us, it was sacred duty. My obsession with these ceremonies grew stronger with each passing month. I began requesting larger quantities of confiscated materials from the border officials. I started keeping detailed records of what we burned, as if documenting our victories against the enemies of Allah. My bedroom walls were covered with lists and schedules, planning bigger and more elaborate ceremonies. I took special pleasure in teaching my younger cousins how to properly dispose of what we consider blasphemous materials. I would explain to them the religious significance of our actions, how we were following in the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad by destroying false teachings. Their wide eyes and eager nods filled me with a sense of spiritual authority that I had never experienced before. The extended royal family began to take notice of my dedication. Uncles and older cousins would seek my advice on religious matters. They started calling me the Defender of Faith, a title that I wore with immense pride. I began to see myself as a future religious leader, someone who could guide our family, and perhaps even our nation, in maintaining pure Islamic principles. My sister would often bring her friends to watch our ceremonies. These young women from other royal families would gasp and cheer as we fed book after book to the flames. They treated me like a hero, and I basked in their admiration. The social aspect of these gatherings became almost as important to me as the religious one. I was performing righteousness for an audience that celebrated my every action. The competitive aspect among family members only fueled my passion further. My cousins would try to show their own devotion by suggesting new ways to destroy the materials or by bringing additional items they had discovered. But I always remained the leader, the one with the most creative ideas and the strongest conviction. I took pride in being the most thorough, the most dedicated, the most spiritually pure. My father began making plans to put me in charge of all religious enforcement within our family's sphere of influence. He spoke of expanding our efforts beyond monthly ceremonies to weekly cleansing rituals. He envisioned me as a guardian of Islamic purity, responsible for protecting our family and our community from Christian contamination. The weight of this responsibility thrilled me rather than intimidating me. I felt like a warrior for Allah, but I was actually a prisoner of hatred. Every book I burned only increased my appetite for more destruction. Every ceremony left me planning the next one before the ashes had even cooled. I lived in a constant state of righteous anger, always searching for new enemies to defeat and new victories to achieve. In the name of my faith, the ceremonies became increasingly elaborate as my confidence grew. We would invite more family members, prepare special refreshments, and even hire musicians to play traditional songs while we worked. What had started as simple destruction had evolved into full religious festival celebrating our triumph over Christianity. Looking back now, I can see how these monthly gatherings were slowly consuming my soul. Each ceremony hardened my heart a little more, made me a little less human and a little more monster. But at the time, I felt more alive and more purposeful than ever before. I thought I was serving God, but I was actually serving the very darkness I claimed to be fighting against. The irony was that in trying to protect Islam from outside influence, I was destroying the compassion and mercy that Islam itself teaches. I had become so focused on hating Christianity that I had forgotten how to love anything at all. But I wouldn't understand this until that November evening when everything I believed about myself and about God would be turned completely upside down. My increasing leadership role in organizing larger ceremonies became the defining feature of my identity within our royal family. What had started as monthly gatherings evolved into elaborate events that required weeks of preparation. I would coordinate with border officials across multiple provinces, ensuring that we collected the maximum amount of confiscated materials. My bedroom became a command center filled with charts tracking shipments and detailed schedules for upcoming ceremonies. The logistics alone consumed most of my waking hours. I developed relationships with customs agents, religious police, and even some military personnel who would alert me whenever significant quantities of Christian materials were seized. I treated these contacts like a network of spiritual intelligence officers, all working together to protect our nation from foreign religious contamination. The responsibility made me feel important in ways that no amount of royal privilege ever had. Teaching younger cousins to participate became one of my greatest sources of pride. I would spend hours explaining the theological basis for our actions, helping them understand why burning these books was not just permissible but necessary for faithful Muslims. I created what I called lessons in spiritual warfare, complete with verses from the Quran that I believed supported our activities. My youngest cousin, barely 12 years old, would hang on my every word as I explained the dangers of Christian missionary work. I taught him how to identify different types of religious materials, how to handle them safely without being spiritually contaminated, and most importantly, how to find joy in their destruction. Watching his innocent face light up with righteous anger filled me with satisfaction that I convinced myself was holy pride. The extended royal family began treating me like a religious authority figure despite my young age. Uncles who were decades older would consult me before making decisions about religious matters within their own households. They would ask my opinion on everything from appropriate Islamic entertainment to proper responses to Western cultural influences. This deference from my elders only reinforced my belief that Allah was working through me in special ways. My reputation as defender of faith spread beyond our immediate family circle. Other wealthy Saudi families began inviting me to speak at their private gatherings about the importance of maintaining religious purity. I developed what I thought was a gift for inspiring others to take action against Christian influences in their communities. These speaking opportunities made me feel like a young prophet called to lead my generation in spiritual battle. The elaborate preparations for ceremonies became increasingly complex and ritualistic. I designed special areas within our courtyard for different types of materials, created ceremonial tools for handling the books, and even developed specific prayers to recite while burning them. What had once been simple destruction evolved into something that resembled ancient religious rituals, complete with symbolic meanings and sacred procedures. My sister would often bring groups of her friends to observe these preparations, and they treated the whole process like a fascinating cultural event. These young women from prominent families would ask questions about the religious significance of our actions, and I would deliver lengthy explanations about Islamic purity and the dangers of Christian contamination. Their attention and admiration fed my ego in ways that made me crave even larger and more impressive ceremonies. The competitive aspect among family members intensified as our monthly gatherings grew in size and significance. My cousins would compete to bring the most spirit interesting or valuable items for destruction. One would arrive with ornate crosses confiscated from wealthy travelers. Another would present rare religious manuscripts seized from academic visitors. But I always remained the undisputed leader, the one who decided what would be burned, when, and how. Personal confession: I felt like a warrior for Allah, but I was actually a prisoner of hatred. Every successful ceremony only increased my hunger for more destruction, more recognition, more proof of my spiritual superiority. I lived in a constant state of anticipation, always planning the next event, always seeking new ways to demonstrate my devotion to what I believed was pure Islam. My father's plans to expand my responsibilities filled me with excitement rather than anxiety. He spoke of establishing a formal position for me within the family's religious oversight committee, with authority to investigate and eliminate Christian influences throughout our extended network of business and social connections. The prospect of having official power to enforce religious purity seemed like the natural culmination of everything I had been working toward. The social recognition I received from these activities became addictive. I would replay conversations where relatives praised my dedication, savoring the moments when older family members acknowledged my spiritual leadership. I began to see myself as uniquely chosen by Allah to protect our family and our faith from outside corruption. My bedroom walls became covered with photographs from our ceremonies, detailed maps showing the sources of confiscated materials, and even some of the more ornate book covers that I kept as trophies. Looking at these displays filled me with the same pride that a military officer might feel reviewing medals and commendations from successful battles. The monthly ceremonies had evolved into full religious festivals by this point. We would prepare traditional foods, invite musicians to play during the burning, and even arrange for religious scholars to attend and offer prayers of blessing over our activities. These events became highlights of our family's social calendar, eagerly anticipated by everyone involved. But underneath all this religious fervor and social success, something was building toward a moment of reckoning that I could never have anticipated. My heart was becoming harder with each passing month. My capacity for genuine spiritual connection was dying even as my external religious activities intensified. I was becoming exactly the kind of person that true religion is supposed to transform us away from becoming. The irony was complete. In my effort to defend Islam from Christian influence, I was destroying every quality that makes Islam beautiful. I had forgotten about mercy, compassion, forgiveness, and love. I had become a creature of pure hatred, convinced that my hatred was holy. But Allah had other plans for my life, plans that would begin to unfold on November 23rd, 2018, in ways that would shatter everything I thought I knew about God, faith, and myself. November 23rd, 2018 was meant to be the crowning achievement of everything I had worked toward over the past 3 years. We had planned the largest ceremony in our family's history, with more confiscated materials than we had ever assembled before. The preparation alone had taken 6 weeks, coordinating shipments from border stations across the entire kingdom. I had personally overseen every detail, from the arrangement of the materials to the guest list of extended family members who would witness this spectacular display of religious devotion. The extended family gathering in our palace courtyard that evening included relatives I hadn't seen in months. Uncles flew in from Riyadh, cousins traveled from Jeddah, and even some family friends from neighboring Gulf states made the journey to attend what I had promoted as a historic purification ceremony. The courtyard, which normally felt spacious, was filled with nearly 40 people, all gathered to celebrate what they believed would be my greatest triumph as defender of our faith. I had spent the entire day arranging the materials in the center of the courtyard. Never before had we accumulated such a massive collection of confiscated Christian items. There were hundreds of books in multiple languages, ornate crosses made from precious metals, religious paintings that had been seized from diplomatic pouches, and even some carved wooden statues that customs officials had confiscated from missionary families attempting to enter the kingdom. The pile stood nearly 4 feet high and stretched across an area larger than a dining room table. I had organized everything with mathematical precision, placing the most valuable and elaborate items on top where they would be clearly visible to our guests. The sight of so much Christian material gathered in one place filled me with a sense of righteous satisfaction that I had never experienced before. My excitement about leading the biggest book burning in our family's history consumed my thoughts throughout the day. I rehearsed the speech I planned to give before lighting the fire, practicing the religious justifications I would offer for our actions. I had prepared quotes from Islamic scholars, references to historical precedents, and personal testimonies about the spiritual pollution that these materials represented. The family's celebration and approval energized me beyond anything I had felt before. As relatives arrived and saw the massive pile of materials I had assembled, their expressions of amazement and pride filled me with intoxicating validation. My father moved through the crowd, pointing the different items in the pile and explaining to guests how I had personally coordinated their collection and arrangement. My sister had invited more friends than usual, and these young women from prominent families treated the entire event like a religious festival. They took photographs with the pile of materials, posed for pictures with family members, and asked countless questions about the significance of what we were about to do. Their attention made me feel like a celebrity, someone whose actions were worthy of documentation and celebration. The social atmosphere in the courtyard that evening was unlike anything we had experienced at previous ceremonies. There was music playing from traditional musicians I had hired for the occasion, tables laden with elaborate refreshments prepared by our kitchen staff, and even special seating areas I had arranged for elderly relatives and honored guests. What had started as a simple religious ritual had evolved into a full scale cultural celebration. As the sun began to set, I called for everyone's attention and moved to the center of the courtyard near the massive pile of materials. The crowd gathered in a circle around me, their faces reflecting anticipation and excitement. I felt the weight of their expectations, the responsibility of leading this historic moment for our family. The silence that fell over the courtyard was filled with reverent expectation. I delivered my prepared speech about the importance of protecting Islamic purity from foreign contamination, explaining how the materials before us represented a direct assault on our faith and culture. The crowd responded with nods of agreement and occasional expressions of support. I spoke about our duty as faithful Muslims to remove these spiritual poisons from our society, and I praised Allah for giving our family the privilege of serving as guardians of religious truth. When I finished speaking, my father handed me a golden lighter that had been passed down through generations of our family. The weight of it in my hand felt significant, symbolic of the authority and responsibility that was being transferred to me. I raised it above my head for everyone to see, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause that echoed off the courtyard walls. I personally lit that fire, feeling more righteous than ever before. The first flames caught quickly, fed by the dry paper and cloth materials that formed the base of the pile. As the fire grew larger and began consuming the books and other items, I felt a surge of spiritual satisfaction that seemed to validate everything I had believed about myself and my calling. The family members gathered around the growing fire, some offering prayers of thanksgiving, others taking photographs to commemorate the moment. Children who had been brought to witness this historic ceremony clapped and cheered as the flames consumed item after item. The entire scene felt like a victory celebration, a moment of triumph for everything our family stood for. The heat from the fire warmed my face as I stood closest to the flames, watching with satisfaction as book after book was reduced to ash. I felt like I was personally striking a blow against the enemies of Islam, defending my faith and my family through direct action rather than mere words. The approval and admiration of my relatives surrounding the fire filled me with pride that I believed was blessed by Allah Himself. But as I stood there basking in the heat and light of what I thought was my greatest spiritual achievement, I had no idea that in the next few moments everything I believed about God, faith, and myself would be completely and permanently shattered. The very fire that I thought represented my victory would become the stage for my total defeat and ultimate redemption. As I stood there feeding book after book into the growing flames, something began to change in the atmosphere around me that I cannot fully explain even now, years later. The fire was burning exactly as I had planned, consuming the Christian materials with satisfying efficiency, but there was suddenly a presence in that courtyard that had not been there moments before. It was not something I could see or hear in a normal sense, but it was more real than the heat on my face or the smoke filling my lungs. The overwhelming presence that filled the courtyard seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was not like the presence of another person joining our gathering, but rather like the very air itself had become alive with an intelligence and a love so powerful that it made my knees weak. I tried to continue my task of feeding materials to the fire, but my hands began to shake in ways I could not control. At first, I thought perhaps the excitement of the evening was affecting my nerves, or maybe the heat from the large fire was making me light-headed. I attempted to steady myself by gripping the remaining books more tightly, but the shaking in my hands only intensified. The golden lighter that had felt so symbolic and powerful just moments before now felt impossibly heavy, as if it weighed more than I could possibly carry. The shaking spread from my hands, up my arms, and throughout my entire body. I found myself unable to stand upright, my legs buckling beneath me despite my desperate attempts to maintain my composure in front of the gathered crowd. The physical sensation was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not painful, but completely overwhelming, as if every cell in my body was vibrating with an energy that was not my own. I dropped to my knees beside the burning pile, unable to support my own weight any longer. The moment my knees touched the ground, something inside my chest broke open like a dam bursting, and tears began streaming down my face with an intensity that shocked me. These were not the tears of physical pain or even normal emotion, but something much deeper, as if grief and joy and terror and love were all pouring out of me simultaneously. The weeping became uncontrollable, great sobs that shook my entire body as I knelt there beside the fire that I had lit with such pride just minutes before. I could hear the confused voices of my family members around me, but their words seemed to come from very far away, as if I was underwater and they were calling to me from the surface. The only thing that seemed real was this overwhelming presence and the flood of emotions it was releasing in me. My father and sister rushed towards me, appearing confused and concerned by my sudden collapse. I could see their faces through my tears, expressions of alarm and bewilderment as they tried to understand what was happening to me. My father knelt beside me and placed his hand on my shoulder, asking what was wrong, but I could not form words to explain something that I myself did not understand. In the moment, I knew I had been fighting against the very God I was meant to serve. The knowledge came not through reasoning or studying or being taught, but through a direct revelation that bypassed my mind entirely and spoke to the deepest part of my soul. I understood with absolute certainty that the presence I was experiencing was the same presence that had filled those books as they burned, the same love that I had been trying to destroy for years. The conviction about my actions was immediate and total. Every book I had ever burned, every ceremony I had organized, every moment of pride I had felt in destroying Christian materials, suddenly revealed itself as an attack, not against enemies of Islam, but against the very source of all truth and love in the universe. The weight of this realization was almost more than I could bear. I began speaking in languages that I did not recognize, words pouring out of my mouth in tongues that I had never learned. The sounds felt familiar even though I could not understand them, as if my spirit was communicating directly with the divine presence using a language that my mind had never been taught. The experience was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. The family members gathered around me, backed away in confusion and growing alarm. Some began whispering among themselves, wondering if I was having some kind of medical emergency or psychological breakdown. Others suggested calling for doctors or religious authorities who might be able to explain what was happening to me, but none of them could understand that I was experiencing the most real and transformative moment of my entire life. My desperate attempt to extinguish the flames with my bare hands came from an overwhelming need to undo what I had done. I reached toward the burning pile, trying to pull books from the fire even though the heat seared my skin. The physical pain was nothing compared to the spiritual agony of understanding that I had spent years destroying something sacred and precious. My father grabbed my arms to prevent me from burning myself, shouting questions that I could not answer. My sister was crying now too, though her tears came from fear and confusion rather than the spiritual breakthrough that was tearing my old life apart. Other family members formed a circle around us, some praying in Arabic, others calling for help, all of them trying to make sense of a transformation that defied their understanding. The immediate horror at my actions consumed every thought and feeling I had. Every moment of pride I had ever felt in organizing these ceremonies now revealed itself as evidence of how far I had fallen from truth. Every word of approval I had received from family members now sounded like applause for my rebellion against the very God who had created us all. The magnitude of my spiritual blindness was overwhelming. As I knelt there in the dirt beside the fire that continued to consume the books I could no longer save, I knew that my old life was ending and something entirely new was beginning. The presence that filled the courtyard was not leaving, and neither was the knowledge that everything I had believed about God, faith, and myself had been completely wrong. I was being reborn in the ashes of my own hatred, and there would be no going back to who I had been before. The days following that November evening were the most confusing and terrifying of my entire life. I could not explain to my family what had happened to me in that courtyard, partly because I did not fully understand it myself, and partly because I knew they would never believe the truth. How could I tell them that the very God we thought we were serving had revealed himself to me as I burned the books that contained his words? How could I explain that everything we believed about spiritual warfare had been backwards? My secret search for understanding began that very night. After the family had finally dispersed and the servants had cleaned up the remnants of our ceremony, I locked myself in my bedroom and began researching everything I could find about the experience I had just survived. I used private internet connections that bypassed the kingdom's religious filters, searching for information about divine encounters, spiritual transformation, and most importantly, the religion I had spent years trying to destroy. Reading about Christianity for the first time with an open heart was like seeing color after a lifetime of blindness. Every page I discovered online revealed truths that resonated with the presence I had encountered in the courtyard. The descriptions of God's love, mercy, and forgiveness were exactly what I had felt washing over me as I knelt beside that fire. But more than that, the accounts of Jesus' life and teachings explained why burning those books had felt like such a profound act of rebellion against divine truth. My first prayer to Jesus while hiding in my chambers happened 3 days after the ceremony. I waited until the early morning hours when the rest of the palace was asleep, then knelt on my bedroom floor and spoke to him as if he were physically present in the room with me. The words came haltingly at first, my Arabic mixed with English phrases I had learned from the Christian websites I was secretly reading. I told Jesus that I was sorry for burning his books, sorry for organizing ceremonies to destroy materials that contained his teachings, sorry for leading my family in hatred against him and his followers. As the words left my mouth, I felt the same overwhelming love that had filled the courtyard, confirming that he was indeed listening, and that my prayers were being heard by the same divine presence that had transformed my life 3 nights earlier. The peace and joy I experienced for the first time in that prayer were unlike anything I had ever known. All my life, I had found satisfaction in destruction, pride in hatred, and purpose in fighting against what I now realized was truth itself. But this new feeling was the exact opposite, a deep contentment and happiness that came from alignment with divine love rather than opposition to it. Have you ever felt that kind of supernatural peace? It is impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it themselves. But it was as if every cell in my body was finally functioning the way it was designed to function. For years, I had been like a machine running on the wrong fuel, grinding and struggling and producing smoke instead of smooth operation. Now, suddenly, everything was working perfectly. My growing understanding of forgiveness and grace revolutionized everything I thought I knew about God and religion. In Islam, as I had practiced it, everything was about earning Allah's approval through correct actions and proper hatred of his enemies. But Christianity revealed a God who loved his enemies enough to die for them, who forgave people before they even asked for forgiveness, who transformed hearts through love rather than commanding obedience through fear. The internal battle between my old beliefs and this new revelation raged for weeks. My mind, trained for years in Islamic theology and Saudi royal ideology, fought against every new truth I discovered about Jesus. Part of me wanted to dismiss the courtyard experience as some kind of psychological breakdown and return to the comfortable certainty of my old life. But the presence of Jesus in my daily prayers and the peace that filled my heart whenever I read his words made denial impossible. My family's growing suspicion about my changed behavior made concealing my transformation increasingly difficult. I could no longer participate in their conversations about religious enforcement with the same enthusiasm I had once shown. When they discussed plans for future purification ceremonies, I found myself making excuses to avoid involvement. My father noticed my withdrawal first, asking repeatedly what was troubling me and whether I was experiencing doubts about our family's mission. My sister became particularly concerned about my sudden lack of interest in organizing religious activities. She had always looked to me for spiritual leadership within our generation of the family, and my apparent loss of passion for defending Islam confused and worried her. She began asking pointed questions about my recent reading habits and my mysterious late-night activities in my bedroom. The discovery by my family of my new faith came exactly 6 weeks after the November ceremony. My sister had become suspicious enough to search my bedroom while I was attending Friday prayers at the Palace Mosque. She found the Christian materials I had printed from various websites, the handwritten notes I had taken while studying Jesus' teachings, and most damaging of all, a letter I had been drafting to a Christian organization, asking for guidance about conversion. When I returned from prayers that afternoon, my father and sister were waiting in my bedroom with the evidence of my betrayal spread across my desk. The look of rage and horror on my father's face was more intense than anything I had ever seen from him. He held up the letter I had been writing, demanding to know if I had lost my mind or if this was some kind of elaborate joke designed to test their reactions. My father's threats began immediately. He told me that conversion to Christianity was not just religious betrayal, but treason against the kingdom itself. He explained that my actions could bring shame upon our entire family and potentially result in serious legal consequences for all of us. He demanded that I renounce everything I had discovered about Jesus and return immediately to my former role as defender of Islamic purity. My sister's betrayal cut deeper than my father's anger. She had always been my closest confidant within the family, the one person who understood my spiritual passions and supported my religious activities. Now she looked at me with disgust and disappointment, telling other family members that I had been corrupted by foreign influences and could no longer be trusted with any family responsibilities. I lost my inheritance, my family, my identity, but I gained eternal life. The material losses were immediate and devastating. My father formally removed me from his will, cancelled my access to family financial accounts, and revoked my authority to speak for the family in any capacity. The royal privileges I had enjoyed since birth disappeared overnight, leaving me with nothing but the clothes in my closet and the certainty that Jesus loved me more than I had ever imagined possible. The forced exile from Saudi Arabia became the beginning of my true freedom, rather than the punishment my family intended it to be. Within 2 weeks of discovering my conversion, my father had arranged for my immediate deportation from the kingdom. He used his influence to have my Saudi citizenship revoked and my passport flagged to prevent any future return. What he meant as the ultimate punishment became God's way of delivering me to safety and a new life. My escape to a Christian nation was orchestrated through an underground network of believers that I had contacted through the Christian organization I had been writing to. They helped arrange asylum in Canada, where I could practice my new faith openly without fear of persecution or death. The journey from Riyadh to Toronto took 3 days and felt like traveling from one world to another, leaving behind everything familiar and stepping into complete uncertainty. The physical and emotional journey to freedom was unlike anything I could have imagined. I carried only a single suitcase containing a few changes of clothes and the Christian materials I had managed to save from my father's purge of my belongings. Everything else that had defined my identity for 24 years remained behind in the palace that was no longer my home. But as the airplane lifted off from King Khalid International Airport, I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my life. My formal baptism took place in a small church in downtown Toronto, exactly 3 months after my arrival in Canada. The pastor who performed the ceremony had been working with Muslim converts for over 20 years, and he understood the magnitude of what this public declaration meant for someone from my background. As I was lowered into the water, I thought about the fire in our palace courtyard and how God had used my greatest act of rebellion to bring about my salvation. The symbolism of that baptism was profound beyond words. just as those books had been consumed by flames and our courtyard ceremony. My old life was being buried beneath the water, and just as Jesus had risen from his death to bring new life to the world, I was being raised up from that water as a completely new creation. The person who had organized the Bible burning ceremonies was dying, and someone who would dedicate his life to spreading the gospel was being born. My calling to minister to other Muslim seekers became clear within months of my conversion. The Christian organization that had helped with my asylum introduced me to dozens of other converts from Islamic backgrounds who were struggling with the same issues I had faced. Many of them had lost families, countries, and identities just as I had. They needed someone who understood their journey from the inside, someone who had walked the same path from hatred to love. The current work I do helping converts from Islam has become my life's passion and purpose. I operate a ministry that provides practical support for people fleeing Muslim countries after converting to Christianity. We help with asylum applications, housing arrangements, job placement, and most importantly, spiritual counseling for those dealing with the trauma of losing everything they once held dear. Every week, I receive emails and phone calls from Muslims around the world who have encountered Jesus in dreams, visions, or through reading the Bible in secret. Many of them describe experiences similar to mine, moments when the presence of God breaks through their preconceptions and transforms their understanding of truth. I help them navigate the practical challenges of conversion while encouraging them to trust the same God who rescued me from my life of hatred. Ask yourself this question: what would you sacrifice for eternal truth? Because that is the question every Muslim convert must face when Jesus reveals himself to them. The cost is immediate and devastating. Family rejection, financial ruin, physical danger, and cultural exile are not possibilities, but certainties for most people who choose to follow Christ out of Islam. Yet hundreds of them make this choice every year because the truth is worth any sacrifice. Recognition that my audience includes both Christians and Muslims shapes every aspect of my ministry today. When I speak to Christian congregations, I help them understand the spiritual battle that Muslims face when considering the gospel. I explain the cultural and religious barriers that make conversion seem impossible, and I encourage Christians to pray specifically for breakthrough moments like the one I experienced in our palace courtyard. To my Muslim friends who may be reading this testimony, I want to speak directly to your hearts. I know the fear you feel when you consider the possibility that Jesus might be who he claimed to be. I know the loyalty you feel to your family, your culture, and your religious tradition. I understand the risk you would face if you openly investigated Christianity. But I also know that the same God who transformed my hatred into love is calling to your heart right now. Look inside your own heart right now and ask whether the peace and joy you seek can be found in the religion of your birth. Consider whether the God you worship through fear and obligation might actually be calling you to relationship based on love and grace. Remember that truth is worth any cost, and that Jesus who changed my life in that palace courtyard is the same Jesus who can transform your life today. For Christians in my audience, I challenge you to examine your own commitment to sharing the gospel with Muslim neighbors, co-workers, and friends. Pray for breakthrough moments like mine to happen in Muslim communities around the world. Support ministries that work with Muslim converts. Most importantly, show the same radical love to Muslims that Jesus showed to me on the night when I was burning his word. The same Jesus who changed my heart can change yours. Whether you are Muslim, Christian, or searching for truth from some other background, the God who met me beside a burning pile of Bibles is the same God who is reaching out to you today. He specializes in transforming enemies into friends, hatred into love, and death into life. No heart is too hardened, no background too resistant, no situation too hopeless for His transforming power. Remember, no heart is too hardened for Jesus to transform, and I am living proof. The young man who once organized ceremonies to burn Christian books now spends his life helping Muslims discover the love of Christ. If God can change someone like me, He can change anyone. The question is not whether He is able, but whether you are willing to let Him begin that transformation in your life today.